like to call to order the Board of Education Budget Committee meeting on Wednesday, February 6, 2019 at 6:32 p.m. Mrs. Oden? Here. Ms. Raymond is not here. Mr. Kaufman?
Here.
Mr. Mosher?
I'm here.
Mr. Mosher is joining us by telephone. Are you by yourself, Mr. Mosher?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Ms. Van Twyver is not here. Mr. Garino is here. Ms. Hohensie?
Here.
Ms. Timmons?
Here.
Ms. Porter?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. We have with us Mr. Donovan. Before we get started on the agenda, I was asked to put a question to the committee to allow public comments at our budget committee meetings at the end of the meetings after all the agenda items are addressed. So I'd like to put that question to the committee. Mrs. Oden?
I don't have a problem with it at all. If people make the effort to come here, I think we should listen to them. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman?
I think it's a good idea to hear the public voice, but part of me wants to hear what they have to say before the presentation. So I may look at the presentation in new light based upon what they have to say. So I would say I think I might prefer the beginning of the meeting. I mean, you can limit it so we don't lose too much time. But certainly, yes, to hear it, but I think it might be more beneficial to the board before.
Well, I think the idea is that, we get the business out there and then they comment on the business, on the presentations, and the only I would like the public comments to be focused just on that evening's business, so I think it would be better after. That was the idea, was to have it after the presentations.
Can I, just one last thing, if I may?
Sure.
So in the past, budget meetings have gone quite late. Right. I mean, we might be very well intended for the 2 hours. Finance was almost 2.5 hours, which should have been a 90-minute meeting. So budget can go late, then you're asking folks to stay late. So I just would put that in the mix.
Right, because we are going to have one budget meeting dedicated to public comments. Ms. Timmons and then Ms. Hohensie.
Yes, I'm okay with the public speaking publicly at our budget meeting at the end. I do have a question. You said that there's going to be one meeting where they going to speak.
Yes, I believe in the schedule, if I'm not mistaken, there's one budget meeting that's dedicated to public comments completely, the whole meeting. That's why I figured, at the end of our meeting, once we get our business taken care of, that at the end of our budget meetings, we can have some comments on the business that we have taken care of on that night.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hohensie and then Ms. Porter.
Thank you. No, I'm delighted if they want to speak before or after, or both. I also don't want to restrict it to, say, special ed and ELL tonight. If somebody heard the previous meeting and they have a comment or two to make, I'm delighted to hear that too.
Okay, so pretty much to budget business.
Right,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
an ongoing thing. They may have watched from home and then they want to come in and direct our attention to something that was overlooked before we get too deep into it. Mm-hmm. I'm delighted to hear from the public.
Okay. Ms. Porter?
And I think speaking afterwards, some of their questions may be answered in the presentation.
Right. Mr. Mosher, do you have any comments or questions regarding?
Yes, I'm all for it, and I think that your idea of having a meeting, the public comments afterwards on the agenda items that we covered is a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Since I could put it in I could entertain a motion, or we could do it by consent. Does everybody agree?
Do it by consent.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mosher. All right. And so with that, I'm going to move on to our first agenda item, which is special education. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Donovan.
Okay, before we get to our first presentation, I just want to get everyone up to date with the handouts and the way we'll be getting the information to the board during this budget process. What you received today was a handout. You'll notice it's the same table. It's a table of contents, basically the way Tara would like to do this, and I'm not going to argue with her organizational skills, is that each week you'll get a new agenda. A new table of contents. You can throw the old one out, replace it with this. What you'll see is the items that she has colored in yellow. Those will be the new items that you'll be receiving today. So just that, and I'll just run through before we start each meeting. I'm going to do this quickly, just let you know what these spreadsheets and pieces of information are. You can then file them in your book. You will notice each sheet has somewhere in one of the four corners 2E, for example. The first sheet, it says secretary positions by location and type. So that's 2E, so you should file that in the section of the book that's 2E. So I'll just run through these now. The first one is just a list of all the secretaries in the district, what their basic function is, and what school they are at. The second one, which is 3A, it's kind of folded over. We'll go over this in more detail when transportation speaks, but it's basic. It's the transportation expense for the district, comparing the current year we're in now and the same amounts budgeted for fiscal year 20. The next item is 3E. It has a number of pages. I believe it is about 8 pages long. It is the presentation that Sean Smith and myself gave to the Capital Improvement Committee a couple of weeks ago. And it talks about our needs. We did go through this at a Finance and Ops Committee meeting about 2 months ago. This is just the document, so you can have that in the budget book. The next one, which is also a couple of pages, front and back is 4 total. That is the construction plan, which sort of goes with the capital plan. The next item is 3G. There was also a sheet in there that was labeled incorrectly as 3A. That's really the back. 3A should really be part of 3G. And what this is this is a spreadsheet showing the school allocations. This is how we do it. If at some point you'd like to go through the calculation, I'd be more than happy to do so. But basically, these are the funds that we take from the budget each year and give to each school/principal. They then decide what to spend these funds on. But they do need to, take care of simple things like paper and supplies and things like that. And behind the 2 presentation packets, the last page, it's 14A. That is the school reserve balances. These are basically the 5 accounts where we have money set aside if for some reason we overrun the budget. They're typically specific to an item. For example, the first item on the list is school retirement. So if for some reason we overrun the school retirement fund and we need to reach out somewhere, we can use these reserves. So we could go over those in more detail at some other point. And then the 2 larger packets labeled 6 and 7, these are the presentations that we'll be going through tonight. And I'm sure you've heard enough of me, so I would like to introduce Marsha Bagley to come down and go through the special education.
Mr. Guarino, a point of order, if I may.
What's your point of order, Mr.
Thank you.
Kaufman?
I just wanted to ask Mr. Donovan if we can get these things in our packets, because then we could be better prepared for the meeting that we're coming to. I mean,
It's rather difficult to do that with the timing of things. We're getting these together on a daily basis. You'll be behind. If you got to get it in your packet, we have to have it done. So, for example, things for next week I have to have done in a day and a half. We're going to be continually working on this.
and the board does have a policy that says all things presented to the board should be given to us in our packets 3 days ahead. So I'm just saying, it's a rock and a hard place.
You're going to push things off. If you want to push things off,
I'm
you
just
as a
asking-
board, you as a board can do
Excuse
it.
me. I was asking a question if it could be done. I'm pointing out my reason for asking. We're trying to be prepared. So you give us a presentation with 12 pages, so I'd like to be prepared. That's all I'm saying. Maybe some of the material can be made available. Maybe it's not spreadsheets, but maybe the presentations are ready. I don't know, but if information is available, I'm asking for you to make it available.
Next week's are not ready as we speak now.
Okay, thank you. Just asking.
Ms. Raymond is here, I'm sorry.
I am
Go
here.
ahead, Ms. Raymond.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if it's the will of the board, since next week's was moved from a Wednesday to a Tuesday, just maybe skip that week. I have no idea what's on the agenda for that, and then pick up. That way, you could have the time that you need, and then Mr. Kaufman could also be satisfied to have his time to review it. Or would that put us way behind on the budget?
Go ahead,
schedule?
Dr. Mosley. Go ahead.
I think that that's going to be a real challenge. We are behind in a lot of things here. I'm just going to be very honest with you. We've been processing Mr. Kaufman's right to knows for the last couple of weeks, and so that has pushed us behind quite a bit in the things that we're doing operationally within the district. We try to get as much as we can to the board as much as we'd like to, but I have to concur with Mr. Donovan. I don't. This is a lot of information that we're trying to do in a timely manner, but we're also processing things that are also coming from the board that makes it more challenging for us to get you the information for the budget and for the upcoming meeting that's coming for the BOE.
Thank you, Dr. Mosley. Mr. Donovan, thank you for your patience. Can you please continue with our presentation tonight? We appreciate it.
Sure. Hi, my name is Marsha Bagley. I'm the Director of Special Ed here. Excuse me. Thank you for having me tonight. There is a packet, I believe the top of your packet says department. I do have a slideshow to show you, but detailed information can be found in the packet. There's a lot of information, So I just wanted to come tonight to talk to you about our students and then the requests that we're making for our budget. In Nashua, we currently have 2,054 special education students, and those are students ages 3 to 21. And that number is as of January 31st, 2019. The number changes, excuse me, daily, so that's the most recent number we have. 1,632 of those students are educated in our regular education classrooms with special education supports. 231 students are enrolled in our preschool classrooms. We have 16 preschool classrooms across the district, and we service 231 students in those classrooms or through what we call drop-in speech for students who receive speech therapy. We have 99 students in our specialized programs. We have 17 intensive needs classrooms across the district, 9 project achievement classrooms. Our project achievement classrooms are for students who have emotional disabilities. And we also have 4 signs of learning classes. And our signs of learning classrooms are for students with hearing impairment, deaf or hearing impairments. And we have 92 students in out-of-district placements currently. They are either court-placed or educationally placed. Yeah. Oh, I think you.
It's in your packet.
Yeah,
Oh, it
you
is?
have
Oh, excellent,
Yeah.
thank you.
Section 6,
That's okay.
in
So
that yellow.
the Special Education Department in Nashua consists of a SEAT team, a Special Education Administrative team. There's a director, myself, 2 assistant directors, a preschool coordinator, an out-of-district coordinator, a chief school psychologist, a Brentwood Academy coordinator, an office manager, and 2 administrative assistants. We have 138 case managers. We have 354.9 paraeducators, 27 speech-language pathologists. Not all 27 are full-time. 14.5 school psychologist interns, school psychologist and an intern, 19 occupational therapists, 7 physical therapists, 7 ASL interpreters. ASL is American Sign Language, 4 teachers of the deaf, or TODs, 3 teachers of the visually impaired, 2.3 board-certified behavior analysts, or BCBAs, 1 behavior specialist, and 1 behavior specialist paraeducator.
Can I just ask a quick question? On one page,
Save our questions like we did before for the end of the... I'm sorry. I would like to save our questions till the end of the presentation, like we
just
did
that
in the
there's
previous...
conflicting data. I was just,
In the previous, in our previous meeting. Go ahead.
Is
Ms.
this
Bagley.
slide that you just gave us in the presentation?
Can she continue with the
I'm
presentation,
trying to
please?
follow along. Do we have that information?
Not in
I'm
here.
asking it. We just given all this information. Is it in this package?
Can I
Is
answer?
the slides, are the slides you're giving in the package? That's what I'm
Ye-
asking.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Where, please? I'm looking in the beginning of the package. Those slides were there. I was able to follow some of the data.
There should be the slides from the PowerPoint.
Yeah, we have them.
Okay, so it's in the back of the section. Thank you.
So in special education, we have laws that govern our practices. The Individuals with Disabilities Improvement Act, which is the federal law, and the New Hampshire Standards for the Education of Children with Disabilities. And those laws mandate that we provide free and appropriate public education, or a FAPE, as we call it in special ed, in the least restrictive environment, or LRE. We are also mandated to provide specially designed instruction to address the unique needs of students to ensure access to the general curriculum to meet educational standards. Additionally, we're also required to provide students with high-quality related services to provide access to the general curriculum and assure reasonably calculated progress within that curriculum. And we also are required to provide a continuum of services to students ages 3 to 21. This goes from least restrictive to most restrictive, preschool classrooms, regular classrooms, resource rooms, self-contained classrooms, special day schools, residential programs, home instruction, and hospital or institutions. I wanted to share with you tonight a few success stories that it seems like we don't always hear the good stuff. So we have a student who moved here. She's in high school. She's been to several different schools in different countries and different states. Her family is Spanish speaking and she is deaf. And she had limited abilities with ASL, or American Sign Language. She registered at South and joined our Signs of Learning program, which is our deaf and hard of hearing program. Within days, she started communicating using ASL consistently, and she wants to come to school now. She enjoys being at school, which is a change for her. She's made significant gains in the few months that she's been here. She receives specialized instruction daily from a teacher of the deaf and services throughout her day from an American Sign Language interpreter. She'll be receiving services from us until she's 21, only due to the fact that she had such sporadic school experience. It's not due to her inabilities or abilities. The second student I'd like to share with you is a student who is in an intensive needs classroom and was unable to participate in the general education classroom due to his frequent behaviors of placing items and his hands in his mouth. Data collected showed that he did this on an average of 5,000 times per day, resulting in frequent illnesses and choking hazards. The team worked with the BCBA to develop and implement a behavior plan, and the student's behavior decreased from an average of 5,000 to 3. This allowed him to participate successfully in the general education classroom. The next student I have to share with you is a student in one of our project achievement classrooms, and our project achievement classrooms is for students who have emotional disabilities. He had a history of displaying significant aggressive behaviors, including hitting, punching, and throwing items. He was unable to participate in the regular education classroom due to the nature and severity of his behaviors. The school psychologist intern worked closely with the team to develop an appropriate behavior plan and provided intensive support to the student in a one-on-one setting. With the implementation of the plan and the supports of the school psych intern, the student is now able to spend the majority of the day in the general education classroom and is making appropriate academic gains. And the last student I wanted to share with you today is a student in 3rd grade who has displayed oppositional behaviors. He struggles with impulse control and was aggressive towards peers, resulting in 7 office referrals, 2 in-school suspensions, 3 lost recess privileges, and a significant amount of time spent in the office. The team requested the help of the behavior specialist team and started the referral process for project achievement. The behavior specialist team developed a behavior plan and monitored it for 12 weeks. At the end of the 12 weeks, the student had 0 office referrals and was no longer displaying the interfering behaviors. The referral to project achievement was no longer warranted, and the student was able to remain in his least restrictive environment. So, what we are requesting, we have identified a need for 2 additional school psych interns instead of 1 full-time school psychologist. In the past, we've asked for a full-time school psychologist, and it has not been included. And I'll talk more about the interns, but this is a cost-effective way to meet the need. We will need an additional teacher of the deaf. We need an additional paraeducator for the district-wide behavior specialist team, 2 additional sign language interpreters at Nashua High South, increase of 10 hours to secretarial support at Brentwood Academy. We need to increase 1 board-certified behavior analyst, or BCBA, from 0.3 to 1.0. Special education head teacher stipends at Fairgrounds Middle and Pennock. An additional 0.6 speech-language pathologist, 1 paraeducator for Brentwood Academy. So the rationale for our 2 school psych interns: we need to continue to effectively meet the ever-growing needs of our students within the least restrictive environment, resulting in fewer referrals to special ed and out-of-district placements. We want to be able to support staff's ability to address the social emotional learning needs of all students while helping to maintain successful student outcomes. And it's a cost-effective alternative to previous budget requests for additional school psychologists. And Appendix C has more detailed information as to the reasoning behind that. The rationale for the teacher of the deaf: we will have 14 students at the elementary level who will require services from a TOD. Due to the variations in the grades and levels and skills, an additional TOD is required. This will help prevent out-of-district placements and possibly result in an additional revenue source, as the district will be able to accept additional students in grades K through 5 from other districts. And Appendix D has further detailed information for you. The rationale for the additional para for the behavior specialist team: to provide behavior management consultative services to help support students in crisis or with pervasive behavior problems that impact their learning in the general education classrooms, allowing students to remain in their LRE, or least restrictive environment. It will reduce the number of referrals to specialized programs and provide staff with training and skills required to meet the behavioral needs of our students. And important to note here is that our behavior specialist team works with all students, not just our identified students or our special ed students. So it's a resource that is available to all of our students. And the detailed information is in Appendix E in the packet that I put together. 2 additional ASL sign language interpreters are needed at the high school. We will have 5 students in grades 9, 11, and 12 who will require between 180 and 360 minutes of interpreting per day. Currently, there are only 2 interpreters at Nashua High South, and next year 4 are needed. We'll be able to continue to meet the interpreting needs of our students within the students' least restrictive environment with this addition. And Appendix F refers to further detail. For the increased secretarial time at Brentwood by 10 hours, this will allow for students, parents, community members, and staff to have consistency in communication with Brentwood Academy. It'll ensure that the secretary is in the building prior to student arrival and after student dismissal to assist with attendance calls, transportation issues, etc. and it will allow us to align with other Nashua school secretarial support. And Appendix D refers to that. The rationale for the increase BCBA from 0.3 to 1. The current caseload of 1.3 BCBAs, and that they cover grades K through 12, is 60 students in 17 classrooms across 9 schools. The recommended caseload for a BCBA is 10 to 15 students. The increase will bring the caseloads closer to 30 students. It's still double the recommended caseload, but it's closer to the recommended caseload. And this will allow the staff to meet the academic and behavioral needs of our students who require a highly modified, systematic approach in order to gain skills required to continue to make reasonably calculated progress within the curriculum. And this will help reduce the number of out-of-district placement referrals. And Appendix H speaks to that. The rationale for, for the head teacher stipends at Fairgrounds Middle in Pennock. Currently, there are head teachers at the 2 high schools and at Elm Street Middle School. This will allow for more communication and collaboration amongst the 3 middle schools and 2 high schools, resulting in better planning and programming for all students. And this will help support special education staff within the buildings and support clearer communication and expectations for all staff. And Appendix I goes into more detail. The rationale for an additional 0.6 speech pathologists, that works out to be 3 days per week. This will allow the district to meet the level of services as dictated in students' IEPs within our schools, our specialized programs, and at charter schools. When students are placed in charter schools by their families, we are still responsible for providing services that are outlined in their IEPs. We have no control over where those charter schools are. We're lucky that we have 2 very close in Nashua, so we have that ability to be there, but we are still responsible for providing the services. We need to effectively meet each student's unique communication needs, allowing for greater access to the general education curriculum, and to ensure that we are compliant with IDEA and the New Hampshire standards for the education of children with disabilities. And Appendix J has more information for you. And the last piece of rationale I have is for 1 paraeducator for the Brentwood Academy. This person will help facilitate the processing of events when students are removed from the classroom due to behavioral issues or other emotional issues that they're experiencing. It'll help assist in the development of clear and concise plans for students to develop appropriate coping strategies within the educational environment. And it will result in the reduction of the number of conduct incidents and ensure that students are accessing the curriculum. And Appendix K has that further information for you. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my requests. I know that building a budget is not easy. And I think I accidentally skipped the slide that talked about why we're requesting these. And every request is based on the IDEA or New Hampshire standards for children with disabilities. So there are laws that mandate that we have services in place for students. And these are all prioritized areas that we've targeted this year. There are several other areas that we continue to have need in, but these are the prioritized areas. So I can answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bagley. I'm going to go to Mr. Moshe first, see if Mr. Moshe has any comments or questions. Can you hear us, Mr. Moshe?
I certainly can. And it's very interesting to hear about the special needs that we have. And I had to talk about that today with one of the professionals that I deal with, and had no idea of how much was required by mandate from the state and federal. And I know that there's quite a bit there, and I certainly hope that we can have everything that is required remain in the budget so that we can supply the needs of these children of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Ms. Raymond?
Thank you. I have several I've flagged as we go through. So one of the questions I had was on the 2 school psychologist interns. Would those people be conducting assessments to determine where people are? Are they shared at all with any other departments? What's the plan for them?
So schools, and if you refer to Appendix C, there's a lot more. This is actually the most detailed appendix that we put together. School psychologist interns have the same abilities and responsibilities. They just need to be overseen by a school psychologist. So they can conduct evaluations with the oversight of a school psychologist. Our school psychologists are available to any student that needs them. So, they come out, they're in our budget, so a lot of our special education students really access them almost daily, some of them. So the plan would be that they're ours, but they're available to all students.
Okay. I understand our current school psychologist is like constantly busy and never has a break at all to do anything except for, be with students. So it would be great to relieve some of that pressure. I have 2 more, if that's okay. For the for the behavior specialist team, where would they be located?
The behavior specialist's office is currently at Main Dunstable, so they travel though throughout the district. So that's where they have a computer and have email access and everything. But there are probably days that they never actually see the inside of Main Dunstable. They're available to all of the district schools.
Okay. And then my last little flaggy was the head teacher stipends for Fairgrounds and Pennock. I'm curious about how this affects class loads, or I guess I don't know enough about special education to understand how that works anyways. But, in my experience, the head teachers like at the high school tend to have a slightly lower class load so that they can provide other services and do other work. So how would that work at the middle schools? And then I guess a follow-up to that would be, if they do have a lower class load, how would that affect the other teachers?
So currently the model at Elm Street is the head teacher recently changed. So we're in the middle of the year. The teacher that took over as the head teacher still continues to have a caseload. But in working with the building administration, the head teachers continue to case manage a smaller number, but they have the ability to help out in cases that are more contentious, and they do still have classes that they teach. So it would mean redispersing some of the case management, but we can do that pretty efficiently given the number of case managers we have at those schools.
Okay, thank you.
I thought I saw Ms. Hohensy's hand
Yes.
up.
At the beginning, it says that we have general special education, we have 81.5 case managers, and then later on it says who we are, and we have 138. So
I can explain that, sure. So in the I'm sorry, I feel like I'm yelling at that. General education case managements are the students who are not in our intensive programs or our project achievement. So we have 81.5 case managers for the students who are in our regular education classrooms receiving special ed support. So 81.5 case managers are not assigned to programs, but they are assigned to grade levels at each school. So for example, at Amherst Street School, we have a K-2 case manager who works with special ed students who are in grades K-2, and she pulls them out of class for services or goes into the classroom to provide services. So we have 81.5 case managers who are not what we call intensive needs or specialized programs. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, but then, thank you, that's great. And maybe because I didn't read this thoroughly, I'm just trying to figure out what the other 56 and a half, are they for the out of districts? Do they keep track of them in the different programs, making sure they get the services they need? I'm just trying to figure out how it fits together.
Sure. We have an out-of-district coordinator who oversees the 92 students who are out of district. The other case managers work in the project achievement classrooms or our intensive needs classrooms or our Signs of Learning, which is our deaf and hard of hearing program.
Okay, thank you. So they're essentially the students that are not mainstreamed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, that's very helpful.
Is there anyone else who has any questions? Ms. Porter, and then Mrs. Oden.
Nice presentation, very
Thank
nice.
you.
I'm just wondering on these additional requests, does that help us to be in compliance with IEPs?
Yes. Yes. Are you talking about on page 3? Is that which one?
Well, I'm
Oh,
looking
you're
at
on the-
page 2,
yep.
just the list here. So you have a bulleted list, and I imagine that some of these directly impact our ability to be in compliance with IEPs. So would you say that every single one of these does that?
The most important, if I had to pick and choose, the additional teacher of the deaf, it's physically not possible for the person. We only have one right now, and the number of students who will require, if you go to Appendix D, there will be 14 students who require teacher of the deaf throughout their day, every day. That's grades preschool through 5. So we do have a preschool teacher of the deaf, but she teaches the preschool. And then through K through 5 is where the big need lies. The 2 school psych interns, we are, when Mrs. Raymond said that the school psychologist is so busy, it's true. They're seeing kids, they're trying to problem solve through crisis, they're writing reports, they're doing evaluations, and honestly, the report writing probably doesn't happen during school time all the time because they're so busy with students every day. The additional paraeducator for the behavior specialist team, this, again, they work with all students, not just our special education students. So behavior is a huge issue in the district. We see more and more students experiencing trauma, and that trauma comes out in the way of behaviors. So that's an issue and a need. The sign language interpreters, that will make sure that we meet the students' IEPs. The board certified behavior analyst, I can share with you that we've had at least one request for out of district placement because of the number of hours that we have of BCBA. And then the speech, the speech language pathologist is also needed to meet the IEPs, as well as the paraeducator at Brentwood. So
what I'm hearing you say is that all of these things directly impact our ability to be in compliance.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Oden.
Thank you, and thank you, Marsha. In the past, we often have had to open preschool programs during the school year. Do you anticipate seeing some students come in and a possible need to open another classroom for preschool?
At this time, we don't. But when I was the preschool coordinator, it happened a lot. But at this point, with the numbers that we have, we can only project so far. We have a lot of students move into Nashua, so we can't account for those. But at this point, we do not anticipate that need.
Well, let me ask something in relation to that. Are most of our preschool classes at a maximum number?
Yes.
So if we had 2 or 3 move in, we would have a problem?
Yes.
Okay. What do we have for professional development for teachers and paras? I was talking to a para the other day, and as you said, we have more students experience trauma, and they bring that to school with them. And the para said to me, we haven't been trained how to best deal with these students. So do we have some professional development coming for those paras and obviously teachers also?
So, and what I would say is that none of us have been trained to deal with what we're seeing in our classrooms daily. The opioid crisis is hitting hard. And the students that we see are not the students that we went to school to teach. And we do have, in fact, we have a trauma-informed consultant coming to do a 3-part series for professional development starting in March for the early release. She's working with us to develop a training, and so she'll come this year, and then next year she'll come on the times that the other schools couldn't come because of the time difference with the release times. And we do offer, Amy Connors, who's our behavior specialist, does a lot of training on site with our staff and students, especially specific students. She's the behavior specialist who we really utilize a lot. So we are working on bringing more professional development around that, and this social emotional learning that the district is embracing helps address some of those issues as well.
Okay. And will paras be able to attend that training?
The trauma-informed training is for paras.
Okay, okay.
Open it up to teachers as well.
Another comment I hear from teachers, they say the last 2 or 3 years they have seen major changes in the behavior of students. I know you're asking for one more behavior para. Are you seeing more needs than one? I know you're trying to work within a budget, but when you have kids that are suffering trauma and they are in a classroom and they don't have a place for them to go, you know, I've heard of kids running out of schools, and that's a big problem. Is one really enough?
Well,
No.
I feel like
Well, you know, we're going to send this budget down to the alderman. Here's what we need. And I think we have a responsibility with what I'm hearing from people in the schools to say, this is what we really need. I'm looking here and I don't see any regular ed paras to meet IEPs. And I don't think I have heard from one teacher that came here one night and gave a presentation and said, it was a special ed teacher, I have all the paras I need. That was the first teacher I had ever heard say that. And I don't see any more paras here, but we have kids to educate. That's our goal. And I want to make sure that people know what we really need, because we have cut back so much each year that, you know, there's not anything to cut. And when we have needs, I think basic needs, I think we need to let the alderman know exactly, you know, how thin we're running.
So in response to your question, I think that, yes, obviously we need more support behavior, but we also need to have more training for our regular education staff and our special education staff around behavior management. And part of requesting this addition to the behavior specialist team is to hope that we can get more of that training out and be more proactive to responding to behaviors. Oftentimes, you don't know what the student's coming to school with until they're there. So if we could provide the staff with the tools that they needed before those students show up, would be even more effective. You know, last year at this time we had 1,984 students. Now we have 2,054. That's an increase of 70 students. And we still have the same level of staffing. So there's a need, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Marsha.
I'm going to go to Mr. Kaufman, and then I have some comments. Go ahead, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. Ms. Bagley, thank you very much for your presentation. You really anticipated a lot of questions. I appreciate the statistics in particular, trying to get my head around actually how many students do we service in each of these programs. So I want to thank you for doing that. So one of my first questions is, what I did is I divided the 2054 into 11,000 students, trying to understand what percentage of our students are in special ed. So when I used my calculator, not my head, it came up with 18.67%. So my first question is, how, with this number of students, and I know we're in a large district, but I'm curious proportionately with other districts, say Manchester or Merrimack or other larger Portsmouth, you know, places that have larger student populations, even in Mass. How would this 18+% number in terms of special ed population in a school system compare?
The last percentage I saw, and I don't believe it was for this year, was 16%. And we've always usually run right along with that trend, but I can find out. I think the DOE puts out a report, and I can get that information.
So is that, you're speaking on a state level?
Yes.
For New Hampshire?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I have another question. I mean, I tried to ask this board at our last board meeting about convening a discussion on behavior, and it was defeated by this board. And one of the first things you highlighted tonight was that, and I'm trying to quote you, you said that behavior is an issue in the district. And you repeated that theme several times. Mrs. Oden asked you if the one interventionist was enough. So what can you do to help me persuade my colleagues at this table to reconsider the need for a district-wide conversation about behavior?
So first, I'd like to say I don't want to be put into the middle. Let
me just say, it would probably help your case if you'd make the case. Because I can't do anything more about it.
When I say that behavior is an issue in the district, it's really about how we are equipped to handle the behavior that we're seeing. It's very different behavior than we've seen in the past. Students are disruptive to a whole another level, and it's not all students. There's a pool of students that make an impact, and the impact is greater than it used to be. So we have a lot of people doing a lot of good things with our kids and supporting them behaviorally. But we do have students who throw us for a loop. And, I've worked with a lot of behavioral kids, and we need to be able to train and give our staff the tools that they need to be proactive in response to behaviors and be ready for the behaviors that walk through their doors.
If I may continue.
Sure, go ahead.
So, Ms. Porter alluded to it in terms of the resources you're asking for to be compliant. And I guess that's both at the state and federal level.
Correct.
You're regulated completely, right? So I'm curious, and this is just what is the penalty the district might face if we don't meet the staffing recommendations? Are they requirements or are they recommendations?
So the level of, so when a student has an IEP, an individualized education plan, a team of professionals determines what that student needs in order to be successful in the general education curriculum. So that team determines what the level of services are that the student requires. So if we have 17 students who need all-day teacher of the deaf, but we only have one teacher of the deaf, 17 students across different grade levels, one teacher of the deaf, obviously one teacher of the deaf cannot provide instruction to 17 students throughout the entire day and be successful. So if we are not meeting IEPs as outlined, an IEP is a legal document. If we are not meeting those IEPs, parents have the right to file a state complaint with us, go to the Office of Civil Rights, or file what we call a due process hearing, which we have to go to hearing over.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bagley. I have...
Not finished, Mr. Guarino.
Okay.
Each of the other members went through their questions. I'd like to complete mine.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So on the next slide, page 5, when you talked about the teacher of the deaf again, your second bullet addresses, the intent to perhaps, and possibility, not guaranteed, to prevent out-of-district placements and possibly result in additional revenue sources as the district would be able to accept additional K-5 students as we have. So we would have extra capacity if this additional person were hired?
Possibly. So the student, it has to be an appropriate match of skill level for us to take in students. We do have a few students that we do tuition in currently in our Signs of Learning program or our Deaf and Hard of Hearing program. So if we got a referral for a student from another district who required that level of services, if we had an appropriate instructional match already in our program, we could take that student in.
Okay, so you couldn't say, like, for example, at Brentwood, when I went up there and had the conversation, they said that if we if we increased their part-time staff to full-time staff, that they could, given the capacity of the program on that particular day with 16, maybe 18 students, that if we, and the building, physical plant, if you would, the campus, could support up to 24 students, that we had the potential of bringing in anywhere from 6 to 8 students into Brentwood as, would you call them in-placements? Out of district from another place, right?
Right.
So I don't see that proposal as part of this. And I know I asked for it before, that I asked special ed, and Mr. Donovan might remember. And we've talked about this on the board for all my 3 years on the board, is trying to think more of ourselves as a destination for other districts to place students whom they have that need services that they can't provide, but since we're larger, maybe we could provide them because we have excess capacity. So why was the concept of Brentwood additional capacity teaching support? I think it was going from, I know a lot of them are part-time instructors over there, they're not full-time, or I don't recall the exact specifics, but it sounded as though it was a modest investment to increase the staff, but it seemed to me that it could leverage, you know, if you could bring in, let's say, even 5 students, and maybe you would get revenue of 20, 30,000 per student, you know, that's highly valuable to this district.
So there's only a few part-time staff at Brentwood, and we're working with the Brentwood team, our coordinators here tonight, to continue to develop the program. It was just, as you know, recently relocated to Nashua. We have a new Brentwood coordinator who just started this year. So we continue to work on building that, and we accepted or got notification that we have a district who's interested in placing a student today there. So we do continue to accept students into the Brentwood program.
Okay, and
Thank you.
I think
Thank
I might
you,
have,
Ms. Bagley, for your patience and for answering those questions.
I think I might have a couple of
How
additional.
many more questions do you have, Mr. Kaufman? Because I haven't really had a chance to comment, and
So I'll happily yield the floor to you if I can get it back to finish my questions. Every other board member exhausted their
in
questions.
the most time out of everybody. You've taken like 3 times more time than anyone else, 3 times more questions. So I just...
So that's the
I-
purpose of the
I'm-
meeting.
I
is it not?
understand that, and I'm perfectly willing to give you time, but we should be succinct in our questions.
I
and
think every
try to be
question I've
courteous,
asked
try-
has been
try to
focused on
be-
the presenter's information.
Can I finish my sentence? Try to be courteous to other members, let other people speak also.
They're in the process
and
of
get
cutting
some-
me off.
And get some chance. I did not cut you off. I let you have your question, okay? Thank you.
May I complete my questions?
I'll come back to you. I'm going to go around one more time. I guess I had a comment. Sure. Really quick comment. I got a letter from a student, and it was a very impassioned letter about mental health needs at the high school level. Mm-hmm. And this student had requested, so I'm going to pass on that request to you, to administration. I guess what the student was looking for was after-school support group, like a support group after school that one of the school psychologists could be, I guess, monitoring it, to help students with the stresses that, the student outlined stresses that that she has and the peers go through depression, anxiety, things like that. And it was a very impassioned letter, so I thought I'd make sure that it was passed on. And her suggestion was to have a peer support group after school at the high school level. So I know you have a lot of needs in here, and you've been, very excellent presentation. Thank you for that. And we know we're strapped for resources, but I just wanted to make sure that was heard.
Thank you. I will. I will
Okay.
also share it with the principals at the high schools.
I'm sorry?
I'll also share that with the principals at the high schools.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much.
Quick comment.
Sure, Mr. Mosher, go ahead.
Referring to that letter, I also received that, and I am amazed at the veiled desperation in that letter that this young person is experiencing. And I agree that this is something that should be looked at and possibly implemented for the sake of others that may be in that particular group that may need this extra service.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mosher. Does anyone else have any more questions? Ms. Raymond, and I'm going to get back to you, Mr. Kaufman, I promise. But I do want to caution that we have another presentation, so I'd like members to please be quick in your questions, be brief. Go ahead, Ms. Raymond.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is about money. So as everybody was asking their questions, it got me wondering about the cost, for example, of another teacher of the deaf, or you had said we had a person seeking out of district because of behavior specialists. So what is the cost to the district of hiring that additional teacher of the deaf, for example, versus having to send the students who would need that out of district? And I think this probably applies to every single thing you asked for, but those are the ones that stand out.
So the average cost of a teacher of the deaf would be about $50,000. The cost of an out-of-district placement ranges anywhere from, a specialized out-of-district placement ranges anywhere from 60 to, if you look at our chart on page, it's Appendix B, it outlines the cost of out-of-district placements. We have some students who are attending schools in other communities, and we just pay for the tuition there, so that's about $12,000. But then if you look at some of our other students who require highly specialized programming, it can go up to about $255,000.
Does that count transportation costs?
No.
Okay. Because I was at Nashua Children's Home this morning, unrelated, and as I was talking to their director of academics, he was saying that sometimes the transportation costs for some of their students is actually as much as or more expensive than the tuition costs.
And that's accurate.
Which I thought was interesting. Interesting, scary.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you, Ms. Bagley. Sort of a follow-up to what Ms. Raymond was asking about. Personally, I think budgets, as you know, they're very difficult. Everything is a trade-off, right? We have the recommendation for what we can spend from the mayor, and then we have all these requests. It's very hard to draw a line through it, right? And accommodate what people want, what people need, and really what we think we need for the kids. So my question, my suggestion is, in preparing your proposal to us, in light of what Ms. Raymond was just kind of trying to touch on, if things were presented in sort of a cost-benefit analysis, in other words, I have the need for behavior specialist, I have a need for a teacher of the deaf, and if we were to just kind of putting words out there. If we were to bring someone in-house, and we have a half a dozen students that need that service, if we had to place them because we have no capacity, we're looking at possibly, 6 times 20, 120,000, which would really buy us almost 2.5 teachers. So what I'm trying to say, it puts a scale and a scope to things, which we typically don't get. And if you can relate it to money, then for the few choices we can make, we'd be better off perhaps investing in, and I call it an investment, in one of these teachers, because maybe we also get some revenue because out-of-placements from another district would come here. So I just want to offer that as a way to consider things going forward. And the last question I have has to do with social and emotional learning. When we had the presentation last week by Dr. Mosley, if I recall, social and emotional learning had to be mentioned 3, 4, half a dozen times. And quite frankly, I'm still waiting to hear what it is, what problem we're addressing and how it's being addressed. We hear that social emotional learning needs to be addressed. It's 4 or 5 different resources were identified in the presentation as needed to support that goal. Hasn't been voted on by the board. It impacts curriculum. We should have review for that. But I'm trying to understand what's the cost of implementing, and this is my question, what is the cost of implementing social emotional learning? And I guess it's throughout, is it K-12? Is it mostly in the high schools? I just really don't know. It's a black box to me, and I'm trying to get information that hasn't been presented to us yet.
So that's not part of my budget presentation.
But you
I
mentioned
talk about
social
addressing
emotional
the
learning.
social emotional learning needs of our students, but the actual curriculum is not part of my budget. So-
Okay. But you did mention that social emotional, I thought you did, you mentioned social emotional learning in the context of what you described. So it's not just, it's every student, it's not focused on the kids that are covered in your budget?
Social emotional learning of all students is important. It helps them to develop appropriate coping mechanisms throughout their life. It helps them to handle disappointments, and it helps them develop strategies that are appropriate. So when I speak to helping to continue to provide social emotional learning support, that's what I'm speaking about.
What are the specific?
Dr. Mosley had his hand up. I'm going to, maybe he can
I'd be
add
happy-
something to
excuse me,
clarify.
Marsha, just Ms. Bagley. I think we had a variety of discussions about social emotional needs of our students, and certainly it's a great topic to have. It's a great discussion to have. I think that starts at the curriculum and evaluation pieces. When we talked about the curriculum pieces, we've also talked about it in terms of our programming, and certainly, as I've said at the last board meeting, if not, I'd be happy to do so. You'll hear that discussion pop up, so to speak, when we talk a little bit about our middle school programs and some needs for that. But in terms of this, I would ask that the board table the social emotional discussion, particularly around the curriculum pieces, as this is just focused on the special education budget presentation around services and personnel and the rationale as to why we're making these proposals.
Thank you, Dr. Mosley.
May I continue?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So the question I wanted to ask is, what are the direct costs in your section of the budget, in your part of this proposal, that are directly related to supporting, how much dollars are directly supporting the effort around social and emotional learning?
I think that's a kind of a tough question to answer, because it's more social and emotional learning is more a technique, or there's, I mean, that's like, it's not really a curriculum or a specific program, from what I understand. And I'm not an expert on social and emotional learning by any means, but I mean, we're talking about sort of a teaching approach where teachers and educators look at their class from a social and emotional standpoint. It may not, I would assume that, and Dr. Mosley can comment if I'm on the right track, it's hard to put a dollar sign exactly on on that, on what it costs.
Some of the items, thank you. Some of the items you see proposed, many of them focus on social emotional pieces. Some of them also focus on compliancy in terms of law and free appropriate education. The other pieces that it also focuses on is least restrictive environment for our special education students. So there are a variety of variables that this budget touches upon. I think we can all agree that this is just the start of many opportunities for us to improve the special education students' experiences here in our district. As I said earlier, as we began this budget discussion, that we really have to talk about the elephant in the room is about our out-of-district placement and what are we going to do about that. So the answer to your question is many of the items here are touched on social emotional, but also they touch on compliancy, least restrictive environment. Some of our kids need occupational therapy, so there's a physical piece to that as well. You can't put special education services and needs all in one box in social emotional. They encompass many different types of services and needs. I'll leave you with this. We don't talk about services in special education. We talk about needs, and then you design services and programs around those needs. So there's no one all fits all shoe in this situation. It all depends on the student that walks through the door. And I say that because you don't see the backstory of this. The backstory of this is that we have an idea of what it's going to feel like next year, but we don't really know. Many times we get new families that come into our district. We get families, I think Marsha told that story of that young lady that came from...
Well, she came from many different states and countries.
I'll just say a foreign country, and she spoke, I'll interchange the pronouns so to protect the student's identity. But she spoke a very I shouldn't say spoke. Her sign language was non-American sign language. It was something completely different, and we don't have that. We don't have a bilingual sign language person here on staff or even in the state of New Hampshire. So we do the best we can, and certainly, whatever we come across, we certainly like to do the best we can. We also have kids that are transitioning out of our special education programs because they've aged out at 21, but we also have kids that are in some of our current programs that need a little bit more specialization in terms of services. So we'll keep you posted.
Thank you, Dr. Mosley. Ms. Bagley, I want to thank you very much for your
Guarino,
presentation.
I was speaking, you interrupted me. Dr.
I think
Mosley
we-
interrupted, and I
Mr.
did
Kaufman,
not
we have
ask my
another
final-
presentation. We've been here over
Just
an
allow
hour.
Dr. Mosley to speak at length. I
Thank
had
you.
the floor
Thank
and you
Mr.
interrupted.
Kaufman. Thank you, Ms. Bagley. Very good presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can stay. My bother. Good night, everybody. I don't see the need to stay if I can't ask my questions, which is my job. Thank you. Good night.
Well, you know what? It's actually very good because we all know, and I'm actually going to address that. It's okay.
Did you take a break?
Yes, why don't we take a short recess while they set up?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Mosher.
we're back. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Donovan and Mr. Chopa. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You absolutely did, yes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
It is. It's not an easy one. Before we begin, thank you for having me here. And I wanted to recognize some of the ELL teachers that showed up here. We have Sharon Saunders from Nashua North, Danielle Booton, and Kayla Bassett from Ledge, and Jenna Hutchinson, our newest teacher over at Sunset Heights. These folks, they walk the walk every day, and we're in, you know, this presentation that I have this year is actually not even quite as detailed as the last ones, because everybody was here last year. We know our situation. I know Dr. Mosley's talked about it quite a bit. We're in a bit of a jam, and it's not something that we're going to be able to fix in 1 year. I totally recognize that. So for this budget year, we're requesting 4 teachers, which would alleviate some of the pressure that we're feeling in the district. So this presentation is kind of, it doesn't get, like I said, it doesn't get quite as in-depth as the last year's, but I think that's because we all understand that the ELL program is, we're bulging at the seams, and we need to do better for our kids and to support our teachers. So is it this one right here? Oh, jeez. All right, and then here, no? Okay. So there are recommended service minutes by the U.S. Department of Education, which is also adopted by the New Hampshire Department of Education for kids by level of how much service minutes to receive. And we're not quite meeting the needs of those, especially at the elementary level. We're better off at the high schools because of block scheduling. Middle school is, I don't think we're quite there. I didn't bring all of the data for this because, like I said, we did went through this last year, and also some of the data that we had from some of the schools wasn't quite as clean as and I didn't want to kind of bring it here and knowing that it wasn't 100% accurate. So our goal, like again, 4 teachers would not fully staff the program, but again, it would certainly alleviate the caseloads that the teachers are dealing with. And I thought that this was an interesting stat here where we comprise almost 12% of the school district, the students. We account for 2.5% of the teaching staff and 1.2% of the budget. So this is a program that's only growing in students, not quite in staff, and that's the focus of what we're here for. An ELL student is a student that speaks a language primarily other than English. We've got 1,346 kids identified as ELL. 1,244 are active, which means they should be seen by an ELL teacher and serviced. If the parents agreed to services, they always have the right to decline, which does happen, but it's not too common. Active students receive the instructions until they become monitored. The way they become monitored is testing out on the WIDA access test, which you can see on the bottom. WIDA is a consortium of I guess a language consortium, and they also provide us with their yearly test, which is called the access test. One of the issues that we have within the district is not all of our schools have an ELL program, but our teachers are still required. This only happens at the elementary level, but so like Sunset Heights, no, you're not, no, you're good now. Broad Street is serviced by Birch Hill. Main Dunstable is serviced by Fairgrounds. Is it Yep, Fairgrounds, and New Searles is by Ledge. So those teachers, 2 of the ladies over here, they need to go over there and give these students the access test every year, and also are required to case manage those students, even though they're not in their building, which is, and they're already spread amazingly thin, which we'll see here, which are current ratios. The plus or minus is the difference from last year. Our friend Jenna back there is bicentennial, 70-1. You know, and the thing I always think of this is, you know, these are just numbers, and the reality is those are, each one of those is a child of a parent who's hoping that that kid goes to school and gets the services that they need every day. And we're not, obviously not able to service the students to where they need to be. So you can see we've had some growth in some of the schools and some slip back in others. And this chart here will show you the growth. So we have still grown from last year. And unfortunately, I mean, we are active. The blue keeps growing, but the green is pretty stagnant there. And that's our teaching staff. The number of monitored students has dropped, and that we'll get to. Well, there's another slide that will address that. The access test is what the students have to reach a proficiency level on that before they can be released from the program. Even after they're released, we're now going to be. We used to have to monitor them for 2 years, which is basically a case management job, but now that's up to 4. So our numbers of monitored students that the teachers will be case managing and sending home parental reports and all this, that's going to continue to grow. And I believe, so on the access test, the highest a student can score is a 6. We now need an overall of a 5 to test out of the program. But I believe the state, there's an advisory panel for the state, which I sit on, and they are looking at making that 4.5, dropping it from 5, because we're not the only district. I think us and Manchester, Concord are really struggling with kids not being able to test out of the program, which is creating kind of like the balloon effect. But I don't know if that's going to be adopted this year or next year, but I know that they're looking at it. So this gives you kind of a historical mark. If you look, we were testing out pretty good from 2010 to 2014. The number on the right are the raw number. So testing out about 20% of the kids, and this is like if you were to look at that growth chart again, it kind of stays because we're testing out around 20 and getting around 20. In 2015-16 school year, they changed the access test to online, and a lot of the kids weren't quite as comfortable or even proficient with technology. So it wasn't, like I always say, the teachers didn't change how they were teaching. It was just the format of the test. So we dropped from 18.6 or 156 students to 81. And then in 2016-17, they changed the standards of the test, basically the grading. So if you look at those numbers from the years prior, 184, 171, then we dropped to only 44 kids testing out of the program. Last year, we bounced back a bit with 9.4, which is always good to see some growth. But still, it's half of where it was just 3-4 years ago. The progress numbers are a little odd because that was they always changed every year. It was with No Child Left Behind. How everybody had growth had to go up until you reached 100%. So that's why the percentages of what the state considered making progress changed. But you can see even when that first year they changed the standards, we dropped to 191 making progress, which is by far the worst we did. But again, last year we was positive. This is when I was speaking about the elementary service minutes. So by their proficiency level, so if a child is a beginner, a newcomer, level 1 or 2, I believe, what is it? How many is it, Danielle? How many minutes are they recommended? There's recommended 600 minutes a week. If you bring that up to 3 or 4, I think that goes to, was it 4? Yeah. And then after that, it's 100. So if you look at this chart, 89% of our students we're not providing the recommended service minutes from the U.S. Department of Education and the New Hampshire Department of Education. And again, middle school, I don't think it's quite as glaring, but we're not 100%. But again, the data that I had, I wasn't comfortable bringing here. It's something if you are interested in, I can certainly give it to you once we get things cleaned up. if you want to see that. But this is accurate, and it's obviously not what we want to see. This chart shows you the level of the students by grade level. So this is the high school. Red are the beginners, and obviously beginners are going to require more attention, and they have more needs than the students that are advanced. So that these next 3 slides just break down where the levels that our students are at. And it's kind of it illustrates that just not every ELL student is the same. And even within your red areas there, each beginner is not the same. If you have a student that comes from somewhere with a prior education, where they're proficient in the content of whatever, math or just being very literate in their own first language with the ability to write, you have a lot of skills that can transfer over compared to a student who either is coming to us as a refugee with limited school, or not. They don't even have to be a refugee. We do have students that come to us with limited education. So those needs, there's no blanket one-size-fit-all ELL. Each kid has different needs, and the language acquisition process is different for each person. And one of the areas that this is not going to be addressed much in this presentation, because like I said, it's mostly numbers, but the needs of the students that they have, and I would, when we get to the questions section, I'd encourage you to ask the questions to the teachers, because the ELL teachers, it's not like they just go to work every day and teach language and leave. They're also responsible, and Ms. Porter could probably tell you, they're also responsible, or they become almost like a case manager for the family, because the family doesn't have a lot of ties, and the ELL teacher is the one that the student is most comfortable with. So sometimes the ELL teachers are working to get kids clothes, shoes, to get furniture in the house, coordinating with the refugee agencies. So it's not just teacher content and go home. These teachers are extremely invested in these kids, and with these caseloads, I was happy that we didn't lose anybody from last year, because the potential for burnout is huge. I mean, everything's going at once. It's not an easy thing. This is the same thing for beginners at Fairgrounds and Pennock and Elm. And these are our elementary schools. And Ledge has, that's quite a population there. So other challenges that we face, we have 59 students that are homeless. 221 are identified as special education, and 112 refugees. And everybody in here is aware the refugee experiences. We're getting a little bit more experience with it, but again, it's not something that's been established in Nashua for a long time. None of the refugee agencies have an office here, so everything is either in Concord or Manchester. And for us, when we have issues with the refugees, it's not easy to get in touch with case managers to support those families. So that's just another thing that is difficult. And these are the funding sources. Operating $119,000. The Title III grant is $191,000. That changes from year to year. It's dropped. I think it was $234,000 the year before. That's gone down. The immigrant grant is always kind of a smaller grant. And that is that's the slideshow.
Thank you, Mr. Chopa. I want to thank you for that. Are there any questions or comments? I'm going to go to Mr. Moshe, then I'm going to go to Ms. Timmons. Oh, I'm not going to go to Mr. Moshe.
Let's get him back.
We'll get him back. We'll try to get him back. So I'll go to you first, Ms. Timmons.
Oh, thank you for the information. ELL is a special thing to me, and I'm glad I get a chance to talk, because I don't want to monopolize your time. But on the ESS tests, I have a question regarding that. What if a child tested out, and then what happened when he moved on and then slipped? Does he go back into a language, a learning skill?
We can reassess them or apply to the state to have them come back into the program if it's determined that it wasn't an accurate result that they tested at. It does happen. It's pretty rare normally at the younger levels. That's a possibility. But yeah,
No.
we can always bring them back.
Hi, Mr. Moshe, I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
think we
my-
lost you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I interrupted Mr. Chopra.
That's fine.
Go ahead.
Were you able to hear that?
Yes, I did, thank you.
Okay.
And I have another question, and
Go
then I'm
ahead,
done.
go ahead, Ms. Timmons.
Is it okay?
Yep.
All right. On your other challenges facing ELL department, and I wish I can double that 4 to 8. It would be really nice. Why is it the 221 ELL identified for special education 16.4 so high?
Well, that's under the district average. So the district average was 18, we were 16.4, and we're, like Marsha had mentioned, 16 is about the average, so we're right along average
Oh,
with the
okay.
state as far as identified. And I tell you, that is, and they can tell you, that is the most challenging population within the ELO program, are the ones who are identified with a learning disability, because they might have a learning disability that makes, if it's language processing, they're never going to test out of the program. And you'd require a lot of services. And again, remember when I was saying like no two ELLs are the same? They require an awful lot of support. And when you have, it's very, even as mainstream teachers, say in a social studies class, have to differentiate 4 ELL kids that are in there when they're teaching. The ELL teachers have to differentiate within the ELL room, and a lot of people don't think about that, but it's actually the way it goes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Moshe, and then I'll come back to Ms. Hohensee, and then Ms. Raymond. Go ahead, Mr. Moshe.
Yeah, and I'm listening to what Mr. Chopra says, and years ago, my wife was helping to interpret when she was at Amherst Street, and I know from my own dealing with the different people from different countries, even if the language is the same, let's say Spanish, there's very different dialects and in Spanish, that you get somebody from Colombia or Argentine or from Peru or Ecuador, and they can be speaking the same language, but it's entirely different. It's like with Puerto Rico, it's the same way. So I understand the problem that we have with interpretation and teachers that are fluent in the subject languages, and also when the kids come over from Africa or from Asia, and they need to be entirely, let me say, reprogrammed to fit into the American society, and they can't do it just by watching television. So they need to have expert help in fitting in, especially to the large population that we have in our schools. So I agree with Mr. Chopra completely, and what he's been talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Moshe. Ms. Hohensee?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'm trying to understand, you've got 12% of our students and 2.5% of our teaching staff. So do these students ever go to non-ELL students?
Of course, yeah.
So it's not all the time, because logistically, it's
Yeah,
impossible
no.
to keep them busy.
Yeah, so we have, at the elementary level, we have a pull-out and a push-in, depending on the school and their logistics and the time of the teachers, if they can handle it. So the push-in they would go into the classroom, where the ELL kids are with everybody else, and the ELL teacher would go in and kind of work with that group within the classroom. And then there's pull-out when they take them to their own room and work with them. In middle school, the ELL kids have a schedule, just like everybody else, and they're scheduled into either between 1 and 3 ELL classes a day. So that beginning group, they are underserviced in the middle school in our model, because they really need a lot more time when they come in with the ELL teachers, but we simply can't provide it to them. So they're out in every class any other kid is, and it's the same in the high school. And what we run into, or we just run out of programming for some of these kids, especially at the high school level. And I think Ms. Saunders could speak to that. You know, where kids are taking 2 blocks of ELL and then they're in gym and art, and that the areas of gym and art get overrun because we can't really put them in heavy content area classes. So they're not all day with an ELL teacher.
Okay, so like in the high school, they would do half the day perhaps?
If they're a
in there.
beginner, yes.
If they're a beginner, that's, and what would the medium and the advanced do, like one?
1 block a day, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Raymond?
Yes,
Oh,
my question is almost a follow-up to that, so I think that will work out well with Ms. Saunders. Yes, did I get your name wrong?
Sharon, come over here. Sit down.
I was very proud of myself for remembering Ms. Saunders and then thought I got it wrong. So my question goes along with what Ms. Hohensee was asking about regarding high school students. Last year when you gave this presentation, we talked quite a bit about our high school students not being served with an adequate education because they lack the language skills to be in some of these more academically rigorous classes. And can I just say, my heart goes out to these students. Learning another language is very difficult. And to try and do that while also learning calculus is impossible. I can't imagine how anyone would do that.
Sounds like you get it.
So having said that, last year we talked about the fact that some of our other teachers had done some PD regarding ELL. Ms. Bastoni with the CTE program was working on some ELL programming as well. And I'm wondering if that has provided any relief at all. And then the other question I have is, I guess we'll do that one first, and then I have a second question that's unrelated.
Okay, sorry, I'm not
probably
going to be
still for you.
short-winded. The U.S. Department of Education wrote a small book. And they said that for an ELL student, they need to be able to access a meaningful curriculum, participate in a meaningful curriculum that allows them to fulfill their education in a reasonable length of time. Now, my job is a little bit more condensed than my colleagues at the elementary school, but the situation and the difficulties that we face are no different. We are now faced, Mr. Chopra talked about how our test out rates dropped as the WIDA Access test became an online test. But our data, my small little graphic I can provide for you later, also shows at the same time that that happened, our population changed. Our population changed from being a large population of more proficient students, students at level 4, 5, 6, to a large population of pre-literate level 1 and level 2 students. We also became a refugee resettlement city at the same time. So it's like a perfect storm. It wasn't just that the test changed. And I can't stress that enough. The test is a small part of our burgeoning numbers. We are a nation of immigrants. My accent proves it. You know, people are not going to stop moving to America, okay? Our student population has changed. The percentage of our students who can cope in the mainstream when they are not in an ELL class has reduced. So right now, at the high school level, we have an increase in our pre-literate students. In the past, our level 1 students have spent 50% of the day with us and 50% of the day in mainstream classes. When our students initially come to us, yes, we give them non-language intensive classes. So we would give them a gym class or an art class. What's happening now with our pre-literate students or our students with significant interruptions in their formal education is they can't even cope in courses that we have written for ELL students. We had the Gate City grant where we got teachers certified in ELL. We wrote courses such as ELL Math and ELL Science. to open up the language of math and the language of science for these students. But our students who are pre-literate and our students who have interrupted formal education do not possess the skills to enter those classes. So they sit those classes time and time and time again. I have one student as an example right now. He's in his 3rd year. He came to us with no formal education from his home country. He has sat in ELL math for 3 years. He has sat in gym for 3 years. He has sat in ELL science for 3 years. And he has sat in my literacy class for 3 years. My literacy class is appropriate for him. And he has made huge progress, but from a very low starting point. He is not ready yet to do addition, subtraction, multiplication in English. He doesn't have the basic numeracy skills. And what we're asking for in our teachers is that we can have a teacher so we have the ability to program to meet these students' needs and give them, as the U.S. Department of Education says, meaningful access to an education. Right now, we're not able to do that. At the high school level at Nashua South, we have not run a level 6 course for the last 3 years because we simply do not have the staff to run it. This year, we didn't run it at all. For the last 2 years, we've had to disband the level 6 class after semester 1. We service those students through e-block, which means that we have crazy e-blocks. We have case management loads of 1 to 55. When I first started in the district, we only had 55 students in the high school. Now we have case management loads of 1 to 55. So I know I've been a little verbose in answering your question and meeting the needs. As you can see, I'm passionate about my population. But, you know, Nashua has been, or the ELL department has been the victim of Nashua's austerity measures for over a decade. Rationing only lasted for 14 years. That's a child's education. And we're rationing our children's education.
That was actually an excellent explanation of the data that was presented, because we have to be very careful when we look at data. You know, compare 2017 and 2018 to the year 2010 and 2011. Well, you're talking different students, different population, different demographics. We may have people that immigrants that are coming from those areas, maybe they're more rural. They've had no schooling in their home country. Or and previous, they may have been coming from a more, say, suburban or urban type where they've had some schooling and they can start to pick up things. So I think that we have to be very careful when we look at this data and how we use it. And I think that was an excellent explanation. The more information we have, and I hope the public understands that when they look at this data.
I have an appendix. For some reason, you guys didn't get it, but we'll get it to you. And it shows for the students that have been in the program, 20% of our students in the program have been in there for more than 5 years, which means there's a really good shot those are going to be our long-term guys that are going to stick around for a long time. And then on the other end, 37.7% of the students are in levels 1 and 2 across the districts. Almost 40% are the lowest level. So we'll get this to you as well, and because this kind of breaks it down a little bit more.
Okay. So, Mr. Guarino, I still have two.
Yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Raymond.
Sorry, I wasn't
Yep.
sure if you were going around again or.
Oh,
if you...
go ahead, and then I'll go to Ms. Porter. Go ahead.
Thank you. So now I have a follow-up question I didn't have before, which was, have we ever considered any bilingual teachers or bilingual education, or is that, I think the last count was like 64 languages, so I don't expect anyone can speak all of those. But, and then my last question, I'll just ask it now and you can answer both of them so I don't cut anybody else off, was how many hours outside of work are our teachers spending doing this case management? Because I'm aware that teachers are helping families to use their appliances and working with them on like life skills as they transition to an entirely new environment.
If I could just enter, it's very very challenging to find bilingual teachers. It just really is. So anytime we have that opportunity to hire, it really benefits to have, in some cases, teachers that speak the native language for our students. Anytime we have that opportunity, as I said in previous presentations regarding central office and that support, certainly that is a benefit. But the 64 languages, and certainly finding a bilingual teacher that could speak all 64, we would love to have that person part of our district immediately. We'll hire him or her on the spot right now. We'll make room for her, or him, excuse me. So I think it's always a challenge to really, not just bilingual in terms of ELL, but also just in our general teaching force, just to have that background. And I agree with what you said. Nashua is a changing place. I think we did a presentation down at the mayor's office in terms of the demographics of Nashua, and our largest growing population is actually biracial families, and I'm not talking black-white, just multiracial families, and I would say second to that would be our Latino population that's growing as well. So I agree with you. I will defer. Can I just say the question on the table or on the floor is, how many hours do you spend outside of school? So this is an opportunity to, I'd say, go high and not go low.
No, I'm just thinking how
We don't
much,
need to
how much
exaggerate.
overtime we should be spending.
Well, let's just say it's 8:15 on a school night.
Yeah.
We're still advocating for our students. So I think that would be a fair answer to your question. I think that would be quite normal. I can also say that my principal, Keith Richard, also wrote up one of my observations of a day when I asked to borrow his truck so that we could deliver beds to some of my students and bedding. And another day when I had a guidance counselor's husband donate a washing machine and a tumble dryer, and that was part of my Saturday, delivering that. So, yes, we go above and beyond.
Is that Claudia that you work with, Claudia?
I work with Claudia Castano, but that was not
Okay.
Claudia at that time. I would hate to add how many hours she does above and beyond. She is our outreach coordinator for the high schools and is a phenomenal asset.
And you don't know this, but she'll never show up here asking for, these are what I call unsung heroes. Claudia actually drove down to Massachusetts to a residence that I know of that's about 2.5 hours away from, about an hour and a half away from Nashua, to pick up beds and dressers for our families in Nashua that here at the high school and in the city. And so just, thank you for mentioning that, and thank you for your work, but that's the non-curricular pieces that are going on with our ELL families. So that's a good point.
Our students already have so much stacked against them in terms of being able to reach the curriculum. And things like Sharon was saying, I mean, we keep, at the elementary level, in one of our houses, we keep a basement filled of appliances and furniture and all of that sort of stuff for that very reason. Because if I expect a kid to sit in class and participate in curriculum, they need to have food in their bellies and a bed to sleep in. And I think over the past 4 or 5 years, meeting those basic needs has become a larger part of our jobs than maybe it was previously. I know personally that my cell phone is often getting phone calls and text messages up until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night from families looking for help with things. It's not uncommon for them to come in and knock on our windows at school or wait for us in the office in the morning with electric bills or things like that that they need help with. And it's a tough place to be in because you got to do everything you can for these kids to be able to get to academics. And if we're not helping the parents to make these phone calls before school, after school, on our lunches, then these 10 and 11-year-olds, in my case, are being asked to make the phone calls. And that's a lot of responsibility for a fourth grader to handle.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe, Ms. Porter, did you have your hand up?
Did.
Okay.
I am not asking a lot of questions because I'm intimately acquainted with this, having been an ELL teacher myself for 12 years. I know what you're living through. I feel your pain. So I'm going to follow along Mrs. Oden's train of thought for Mr. Chopa and say, honestly, how many more teachers do we need? You're asking for 4, but honestly, what do you need?
How many elementary schools do we have? We should have one for every elementary school. I think we should have an additional one for every middle
additional
school,
one
an
for-
additional one for every high school.
Appendix I put in for 9.
9.
So if we had 9, I'm looking at Mr. Donovan, and I know what you're thinking. No, I know that, but you know what? I'm going along with, I think the feeling of the board during this budget process is to bring a level of honesty here, because I think there's what we need and what we ask for, and then what we get.
Right. Can I add to that?
So, you know, I think that this is important. I know that the aldermen are very interested in these presentations. I know that a number of them watch. And I think that, you know, that's not, I think it's important for them to understand, like, I think you have a captive audience here, a receptive audience. We don't hold the purse strings. So I think it's important, these conversations, so that the public at large understands what the needs really are, and that when we're advocating for things, it's based on needs for our students.
I think when we talk about the addition of additional ELL teachers, and we said 9, I think that's a very realistic number. I think we also have to start to factor in money for professional development for teachers in content areas. We don't keep our students 100% of the day. We have an increasing need of students, or an increasing population of students who we do need to keep for a longer period of the day, but our students also go into mainstream classes. At the start of the year, we have a small group of not just ELL teachers, but content area teachers who took part in the Gate City grant, and we created a survey for the teachers at Nashua South to say, if we could run a professional development program for you, for our ELL students, what do you need and what are your needs? And it was a way for us to kind of get a baseline measure. 35% of staff said they had never received any form of ELL training at all, either through college or professional training. 76% of staff said they did not know the difference between communicative proficiency and cognitive academic language proficiency. So the academic skills that our students lack behind their American accents. You know, young children, and they develop their accents, but they don't have the academic skill. 73% of staff said they had received no formal training in how to make accommodations for ELL students that were in their classes. So we are putting our students out into classes for 75% of the day at the high school level, and 73% of staff do not know or have not been given any formal training in how to make accommodations. And 67% of staff said they had never been taught how to differentiate between language and content objectives. So for example, you have a social studies teacher who is used to making an objective for their content area, but they don't know how to break that down. And we're doing a disservice to our content area teachers who are crying out for our support. And I think we will all agree, our teachers come knocking at our door to say, I've got this student in my class, how can I help him? What can you tell me about him? How can I support him? But I think when we talk about adding 9 teachers to the budget, we also have to talk about adding money for professional development for our content area teachers. Because it's not just our problem. It's not just an ELL issue. It's a school-wide and a district-wide issue that we need to address.
Do we know how many content area and classroom teachers are ELL certified? Because I know that recently there was a program where a lot of teachers were going to get their certification.
We had 62 go through. We could add 80, but we only had 62 sign up. And I think within...
Oh, you need to go to a microphone. He's waving in the booth over there.
For the program you're mentioning, that was the Gate City cohort. We got a $1.8 million grant with UNH Manchester, and it was for 80 teachers to get certified, mainstream teachers, and we ended up with 62. The rest of them, they got people from Concord and Manchester to go through the program. And throughout the district, I think it's, when you count, I think it's over about around 90 total.
So that was a one-shot deal, that
Yeah.
program? So there's nothing coming up?
Nope.
Again, to continue training?
Yeah. Yeah, we can keep looking for grants and stuff. That was just
That
a
was
great op-
phenomenal.
It
yeah.
really was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it shouldn't be grant funded. Within district, we need to budget for this.
Okay.
It's okay.
I want to recognize all the hard work, the good work that our ELL teachers do for our students. Thank you for everything that you do for our students. Does anybody else have any? And that was a wonderful presentation and a lot of good information. So,
Well, I just think it's super important that you hear from the teachers themselves, because there's no way I can convey what they're doing every day to you.
Sure.
So you really need to hear from them.
And I would say our jobs were challenging last year, and I would say that this year, at least I know at the elementary level, it's next to impossible. I mean, I truly go in every day just praying, because it's challenging. It's extremely challenging, and our kids are the ones that are missing out.
is anyone else? Ms. Hohensee?
Thank you. Is there any number of overall ELL teachers that we have in our district? 24, or is there any? I
It's
didn't
20,
see.
I think it's on the, it's 24, it's 23.6, I think is exactly what it is.
Okay. So is there any way, follow-up question, that we can restructure what we've got? I mean, add more is not, I'm not trying to preclude that, but is there any way that we can change from mainstreaming them to isolating them till they get their language skills up, or somehow doing an intensive, or somehow restructuring what we're doing to be more effective?
I think that's what Ms. Saunders was talking about. I think at the high school level, we really do have to look at changing the programming for the refugees and the kids who come, the long-term kiddos as well. They need a much more intensive experience than what we're currently providing them. So that's with the staff, it's redeploying, it's also looking at how we're providing the services. At this point, we can't do anything like that because it would exclude other kids that need services. But if we did get some more staffing, we would be able to create programming that makes more sense and is more effective.
And for the elementary schools, do you actually take them out of these schools that have, Broad Street, Charlotte, Maine, Dunstable, New Searles?
Those parents decline services.
Oh,
So any parent can decline services, even a parent here with an ELO program, they can decline. It's always their right. So we had, if you look at Bicentennial, the numbers over there, Jenna just started there last year. We had, at the time when she started, I think 60 kids with no ELL teacher there. So we were lucky enough to get a teacher, and we placed at least created a program. She's 70 to 1 is already too many. She's overwhelmed, but there was actually nothing there. But those parents, they want to stay in their neighborhood school. So we offer them so like Charlotte, the kids over there we'll bus them over to Mount Pleasant and vice versa. But the parents always choose, not always, but most of the time choose to stay there in the neighborhood.
yeah, so it's a little bit complex.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
I think
Thank
the other
you.
piece
Yep,
too.
go ahead.
So just since probably mid-December, I know at Ledge we've gotten between 15 and 20 non-English, and the staffing doesn't change. And as you saw, a beginner takes a lot more service minutes. And so our scheduling solution is we take our advanced. So we took a group of 14 and a group of 12 and put them together. So now I have a group that I'm taking out of 20-something children, so that we could make space for these 15 new students that we got that are non-English. So because the funding sources aren't there and these kids come throughout the year, our solutions are often make the big groups larger, which then they're not getting as much practice, not as much attention, and it just keeps snowballing.
Is there any way that you could, in the large group, take like a para in there and sort of instruct and have a helper? Because 60 or, whatever these numbers are.
Unfortunately, like at Ledge Street, fortunately, we have 2 paraprofessionals that are strictly ELL. But while I'm working with those advanced students, my beginners are struggling in the mainstream with no support. So we make the choice at the building level to utilize those paraprofessionals in a way that they can help the beginners be able to access some of the curriculum when we can't be there to help them. Because as Sharon said, similarly at the elementary school level, I know many of our teachers would love more professional development around how to work with these students.
Thank you for trying to work on this challenging program.
At the high school level, we've actually disbanded our level 6 course at Nashua South because of the number of our literacy and pre-literate students that we have. So you have to think on your feet, and mid-year you make an adjustment to the schedule because of the number of students that are actually coming in. Also, within the last 5 years at the high school, we've lost our head teacher, and we have no paraprofessional. We have no paraprofessional either high school, so we don't have that support. So right now, for example, in my literacy class, I have 9 students with 9 different ability levels, and 2 of those students are identified with special educational needs. And no paraprofessional. And because the students' language proficiency is so low, you can't leave them to do independent work because they can't move themselves forward because they don't know how to move themselves forward. They don't come from an environment where they've had prior schooling to be able to be self-motivators and know what to do next. They need somebody to tell them to do that. So when you have 9 students of 9 different ability levels within one class, you get your steps in every day.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Thank you all very, Ms. Oden.
No, I just want to thank Mr. Chopper and his teachers. Last year, you gave a presentation that I thought was one of the best I've ever seen. And again, tonight, it was shorter, but you painted a very good picture of what you're dealing with. And hopefully, we can find some relief because you certainly have a program that has great needs. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just take an opportunity to thank the Nashua Teachers Union and their Teacher Leader Program? I participated in that program last year. As a teacher, it opened my eyes to some of the things that you do and the things that our principals and our district office people do as well. But the program really allowed me to research the needs of our students. It's a year-long program run through the Nashua Teachers Union and the AFT, and it really allowed us to focus on what the needs of our students are and to be able to find the data that we can bring to you to explain it to a budget committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're at the bottom of our agenda, and I did promise to have a public comment period. So does anyone in the public who'd like to speak, please?
Adam Marcoux, 4 Gelori Lane, President of the Nashua Teachers Union. I'm going to leave tonight more depressed than I was when I came in and we won the Super Bowl Sunday night. These numbers in both special ed and ELL are staggering. The disservice that we do to these kids and these teachers and these paras in this district is staggering. We hear what these women do. We heard what special ed does. And I wrote this out in that just think if we were properly staffed, what we could do. And I'm sorry that Mr. Kaufman isn't here with my comments on discipline, because some of these issues we talked about in special ed and in ELL are some of the same issues we're dealing with discipline. It's a big cycle, and if they're properly engaged, and please understand, I'm not criticizing a teacher or a para or any instructional person dealing with 70 kids to one teacher, 165 to two teachers. That's impossible. But yet they come to work every day and make it work. And then they go home and they continue to make it work. During the meeting, I post the information for the membership and I get emails, and I got an email that said, if we add, something's got to go from the budget. What are you going to take away from the budget? To add, I was saying 20 ELL teachers in the background. I'm trying. Sorry, Dan. I'm sorry. I'm not going to come up and advocate to take something away to give more. We need more. And I can't do any justice to what these ladies said. And I'm so glad, thank you for being here tonight, in nailing it right on the head. Our budget is big, but it doesn't meet the needs of our demographics that have changed in the last 10, 15 years. They talk about general ed classroom teachers without any ELL training and still having those students. That was me, teaching 5th grade. I had a student that came in at the end of 4th grade from an African country, limited proficiency in English, spoke very little. As Mr. Chopa said, offered services to Mount Pleasant. Could have been yours, Mrs. Porter. But mom and dad said, no, we want them the homeschool. What am I supposed to do? I have to educate the child. I don't have an ELL teacher to help me, so I call Mount Pleasant, and Carolyn Bork is great. She's one of the teachers over there and helped me, but she's at Mount Pleasant with her kids. And this goes to what Mrs. Bagley asked for the speech-language pathologist to support the kids in the charter schools, which we're legally obligated to do. We're pulling someone from one of our schools to do what we're obligated to do because we don't have enough to cover that, but we don't have enough to cover our own kids. We're not going to solve all of this in one budget. And I like Dr. Mosley's budget. There's nothing to argue with, other than that we need more people in the budget, Dr. Mosley. I'm sorry. Unless you live it every day, you don't understand what we're saying. In the public, it looks like we're complaining. We don't have enough. You only work 184 days. Shut up and do your job. But listen to what their job is. And then we'll bring the special ed teachers in, and the school psychologist, and the speech-language pathologist, and then I'll line up the para-educators and the general ed teachers, and we'll run through. Because we don't have what we need to do our jobs the way we're supposed to, and then we're criticized because our test scores are so poor. Well, guess what? When they're limited proficient in English and they have to take the stupid test on the computer that they don't know how to use, well, let's put the pieces together and understand some of these complex things, right? It's frustrating to be a teacher, a parent, and represent 1,500 people that work their tails off every day with missing some of the basic things. It's like, would we send the fire department to a fire without a ladder? We send our teachers to school every day without pencils and erasers. You know, thank God there's a dollar store and Walmart has all these sales and, buy one, get one free. I'm frustrated as you are frustrated because there's never enough. Our kids have changed. We've accepted that over here. The general public has not accepted that because I continue to hear, well, when I was in school, I graduated in 2003, started teaching in 2008, and guess what? In 11 years of teaching, the changes that have happened are astronomical. And our budget did not keep up. So I'd be willing to go down to City Hall and take it over. I'm just kidding. This is just kidding. But 2.92% is not going to do it. 3.29% isn't going to do it. And I know there's Board of Aldermen watching, and they're cringing as I increase the number, but something's got to give. And I hope that the budget that goes from here to the city is not 2.29%. I hope it's more. And I know Mr. Donovan's having some sort of attack now as I increase the budget. It's probably a good thing that I don't run the budget because we'd have no money. It's very good. It is. Please, what other, I'm gonna ask a question. You can answer it if you want. You can answer. What else can we bring to you to show what we need? I can bring more of my friends with me. We could bring the kids. Like, the sad part is a parent commented on one of those posts that is frightened that her child is starting next year. And they shouldn't be. I'm proud as a dad to have a child at Elm Street in Maine Dunstable and will be going to South and is part of this district, and I'm proud to work here. But I live it every day. I know what my colleagues do every day, and it's comfortable. But when if you're brand new and you see numbers like we're talking, and you're like, should I come here or are my kids going there? They don't know. So we have to educate them, and we have to educate the public. So whatever we can do to help you educate them, you have my number. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marcoux. I just wanted to mention that next week, we're going to have on February 11th, on Monday, our Board of Education meeting. Our next budget meeting is going to be the following day on a Tuesday, not on the Wednesday, because I believe Wednesday is going to be open house here.
Yes.
So we'll be back here talking about the budget next Tuesday. And if we don't have any other business before us, before this budget committee, oh, I'm sorry, I have another person for public speaking. I apologize. Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jenna. I'm at Bicentennial. This is my first year in Nashua. I've been an ELL teacher for 7 years now, and this is my third district. I also live in Nashua, so that's part of the reason why I made the move. It was really overwhelming, having 7 years of ELL teaching experience under my belt, making this transition. In other districts I've worked in, the highest number or caseload I've ever had, 28 students. Now I have 73 students, and it's challenging. And for the first, even now, I'm still like, oh my goodness, what did I do? Because at a minimum, I spend an additional 3 hours at school, and that's just at school. It doesn't count what I do at home on my own time. So we're really hard, and I can't imagine not only getting quality teachers, but again, as we mentioned, parents sending their kids to these schools. We're really understaffed. So I know Nashua is a very different district than other towns and cities in New Hampshire, but we need all the help we can get. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak? Okay. Now I can entertain a motion to adjourn unless anyone has anything. Mrs. Oden?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. On the motion to adjourn, Mrs. Oden?
Yes.
Ms. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. Mosher?
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. Ms. Hohensie?
Yes.
Ms. Timmons?
Yes.
Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-0. We are adjourned at 8:45.
I think it's supposed to be snowing. Snowing or
Thank you.
something.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good night, sir.